It's Adam from Mini Battlefield Game. We are almost done with this series. We're over halfway through. This is the third video about getting started airbrushing. So today we are going to talk about compressors. All right, awesome. So here we go. We're going to get started into talking about compressors. This is the third video. If you haven't watched the other videos, you are going to want to be able to click these links here, or you can look down in the video description. And you want to start off with the overview, and then we talk about airbrushes. And then thirdly, it's this video, which is we're going to talk about compressors. And we're going to specifically talk about compressors for miniature painting. And like I do in the other video series, I just want to have a disclaimer out here. I'm not paid by any manufacturer or anything like that. So these are just my opinions from about 4 years of commission painting, and then 11 years total in the hobby. So that's strictly where I come from. I'm really to help you. If you have any comments, recommendations, or any disagreements, please leave your comments in the comment section below. Like this video and share it with your friends. So without further ado, we're gonna get started. The very basic stuff. What is a compressor? So basically, a compressor, by definition, is something that, compresses something. So in this case, we're talking about compressing air. Basically, what a compressor does is it compresses air from the atmosphere. It provides it or supplies it to your airbrush. So through some hose or something like that. There are different kinds. There are different kinds of compressors. So we have pistons that can be oil or oilless, and then we have diaphragm, which are also could be pistons as well. They could be a diaphragm piston. But we're really not going to talk about the diaphragm ones. You hardly ever see them. Mostly what you see and what I'm going to recommend and what most people are going to recommend is a piston oilless compressor. And the reason behind that is there's little risk in getting any kind of liquid into your airbrush or into your system because of being oilless. Usually oilless, they're less maintenance. They're lower pressure, so they can't get extremely high pressure, or they can't run for long durations of time because they don't have that oil in there to help keep them cool and stuff like that. So mostly your oil compressors are like in construction and stuff like that, those type of industries, large automotive and stuff like that, where you have a large tank and stuff like that. So since we're talking about miniature specifically, we don't need a huge 55-gallon tank of air. I do recommend a tank, however, but we'll get to that in a minute. So basically what happens is the piston moves up and down and creates more pressure in the tank or supply. So like if the compressor has a tank, it'll fill up the tank to a certain PSI or pounds per square inch, and then from there it delivers it through the hose to your airbrush. If it doesn't have a tank, basically your hose and if you have like a moisture trap or a pressure regulator, any of that kind of stuff, that kind of functions like a small tank. So the pressure will meet a certain limit on that, and then the compressor kicks off. It's the same thing with large compressors. You set them at crazy high PSI, and then you could be at like 120, 150, 160 PSI. Whereas airbrush, you're typically looking at 45 to 55 PSI. Some even lower if they're tankless or smaller. So we talked about piston. We want oilless. That's typically what you're going to see. And there are other, it is worth mentioning that there are other compressors out there that are like a diaphragm, basically like a fish pump compressor, like you're really low end, really small, like air salon or nail salon airbrushes. They'll have like little tiny compressors that get to like 15 psi, but they're basically like a compressor for a fish tank. And basically they have two rubber diaphragms and they vibrate together and they create air pressure just like they would in a fish tank. So those are out there. They're good for portability. They're really, really small, really small. But talking about studio, something that's going to last you a while, if you're doing light work and stuff like that, yeah, maybe that would be the compressor for you. So now we talked about the piston, and then diaphragm. Let's talk about whether you should have a tank or not on your compressor. Basically, what I recommend is if you can get a tank, get a tank. Add it on somehow. Do whatever you can to get a tank. And the reason behind that is because your compressor doesn't have to run as long. So for example, if you don't have a tank, anytime you push the airbrush, basically your tank, or the hose in that case, because you don't have a tank, runs out of air almost instantly. The pressure drops very rapidly in an instant, and the compressor turns on. So basically, anytime you are spraying, that compressor is running in a tankless air compressor. And I'll demonstrate that here in a minute. And then basically what the tank provides is it two things really that I think that are important. One is the compressor doesn't run as long, so you get the life of the compressor is longer. And then also the other thing worth mentioning is since it's not running as long, you don't have the heat, so you don't introduce other things into the air supply like moisture and stuff like that. Now don't be thinking that I don't recommend a moisture trap or anything like that, because I do. And we'll talk about that a little bit today, but the next video, video 4 in the series, is going to talk specifically about that kind of stuff. So it does help reduce, because the compressor's not running as much, creating more heat, and because you have a more controlled environment for moisture to get stuck into. Like, so the moisture would actually build up in the bottom of the tank if you had like a high humidity environment. So I'm gonna switch cameras right here, and I'll show you two of the ones that I have on my desk right now. Let's see here. So if you look here, I have two compressors. Both of them are gray. I just now noticed that. But they're completely different. These are actually both piston compressors. I bought this one. This is a TCP. It was advertised as one of their silent or quiet compressors. And I'll kind of show you what it has going on here. So basically, what it is it has a gauge on it, a switch, a power switch, the hose connection, and then it has a little place there for a brush. I have a brush connected to it and stuff like that, so I can run it. And I had to connect something into it so it doesn't run constantly. So that's one of them, and it actually is a piston compressor. Okay. There's no other controls on it besides on or off. Okay. So then let's look at this one. This is I think it's a T20T. So it has the tank. I'm not even sure the size of the tank that it has on there. But you can see here that this is actually the piston housing right here. So there's a big motor right here. The motor spins. This piston goes up and down. Let me spin it a little bit for you. And the pressure builds up here, and the air fills up this tank. And then from the tank, we have on the other side a place where the airbrush connects to. This just happens to be a regulator and moisture trap, also with a gauge on it as well. So this is actually one. If you click on our links below, I have affiliate links. Disclaimer: they're affiliate links. They don't cost you any extra, but it helps support us, get better content out, stuff like that. But this is actually the compressor that I recommend. And it runs to 57 psi, and then it kicks off. You can see that little sensor right here. It actually says right there 57 psi. That sensor or gauge right there, that psi gauge, will tell the motor to stop once the tank pressure reaches 57 psi. You don't ever paint that high, but it gives you the headroom to do so if you needed to. Like it could do some light automotive work and stuff like that. So canvas work and stuff like that if you ever need large coverage. but since we're specifically talking, something else to note: this is a blowout valve. So, like if there were a malfunction with it or something like that, and the pressure for some reason got really, really high in this tank, and the tank was fixing to explode, this pressure valve would blow out first and relieve the pressure in the tank. So let's go ahead and look at the reason why I recommend a tank compressor. So I'm gonna go ahead and kick this one on. Okay, so I got a better shot here. So this compressor here, knock down the airbrush. It's got that, like I said, it has a holder here, a connection for your airbrush hose. Then it has a pressure gauge. And if you look at this, with it on, it looks like it's sitting about 38 psi. This does not have a tank, but this is advertised as a travel / quiet air compressor. So if I take my airbrush out here, notice as soon as I hit that, the pressure drops. Watch again. So it goes from 38 psi almost instantly down to 20 psi. And you can imagine what that does with paint. So instantly you have this big burst of air that shoots out paint. If I were to, in a dual action airbrush, if I had it, back or whatever, obviously you have to. So there's some actual compensation that you have to do for this type of compressor. So I know that it's going to have a big spurt. So I hold it down and then I start working my paint in. This compressor, as long as I'm spraying, it is running. So you can hear it in the background. It's probably pretty loud, but you can see that I have to, anytime I use it, the airbrush is obviously, or the compressor's running anytime I use it, and I get that instant pressure drop. Also, this one doesn't come with any kind of moisture trap or anything like that. So I actually added one on here, and I'll briefly just talk about that real quick. This is an inline. We'll go into these more, like what it is. So there's where I capture my moisture. I have no control over regulating the air, anything like that. So that is that air compressor. It's portable. It's kind of quiet. Honestly, I think that this other one that I have is quieter. Plus, it runs way less. So let's hop over and take a look at that one. Okay, so now we're going to take a look at the compressor that has a tank on it. This is the one I recommend. It's in the video description, link to buy it on Amazon. You can get it cheaper at other places like eBay and stuff like that. But the link below is an affiliate link, and it helps us out, helps us get more content out to you guys and stuff like that. So anyway, so this is the compressor. We kind of talked about it briefly before. I'm going to go ahead and kick it on. We can hear the sound difference here. And it's actually at 0 psi right now. And I can show you. Right now, what it's doing is it's building up the pressure in the tank. So we're filling up the air tank over here. Once it hits 57 psi, then it will kick off. So you can hear it's not that loud, and it's a different sound. It's like a lower, kind of like it's almost kind of like a swimming pool pump, but not that big either. That's probably a bad comparison, because those can be pretty loud. So our pressure is building up pretty good now. This was off, and I drained all the air out, so give it a fair shake here. So there it goes. We're sitting at actually a little less, about 35 psi. Okay. I can adjust what the airbrush has coming out with a regulator. So let me push this back here, Actually, let me go ahead and spin it around so we can see. This is the power of the tank. So I can spray without that thing actually turning on. Now it hit that level. Inside the tank, the pressure dropped just enough. I used up all the air that was pressurized in there. And then now the compressor turns back on. Alright guys, well I'm proud of you. You've made it this far. This is the end of video 3, talking about compressors. If you look down in the video description, you will see the blog post, which will have links. There's also links to our social media page. Please check us out on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Mini Battlefield Games. And be sure to leave a comment below if you have any questions. If there's another topic you would like us to cover after we finish up this airbrushing series. If you haven't, check us out. Our podcast is Mini Battlefield Games Podcast.